Every name on the list received a gold-embossed envelope. Every name except one. The celebration was scheduled for a Friday evening at a private function room in Makati, catered, formal, with speeches prepared for the occasion of Andrade Industrial Supply formally entering a 10-year components agreement with one of the largest automotive manufacturers in Southeast Asia. The contract was worth $2 billion. It had taken 3 years of technical preparation to make it possible. The man whose quality documentation had formed the backbone of that preparation, whose inspection protocols, tolerance specifications, and supplier certification methodology had been submitted as the foundation of the company's bid, was not on the list. His name was Danilo Reyes. He was 43 years old, a Filipino precision quality engineer who had worked at Andrade for 12 years. He was also, on the night of the celebration, alone on the production floor at 9:30, tracing a variance pattern in a batch of cold-formed fasteners that nobody else in the building knew how to read. He filed a warning report at 11:47 p.m. He accepted a technical exchange invitation from a Japanese manufacturing institute that had been sitting in his inbox for 6 weeks. And on a Tuesday morning, he boarded a flight to Osaka. Before we go deeper, type 777 in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. If stories about quiet expertise and the truth that patient documentation always delivers move you, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Stay with us for the ending. Danilo Reyes had grown up in Batangas, the eldest son of a welder who repaired agricultural equipment and a mother who kept meticulous household accounts in a ledger she updated every evening after dinner. From his father, he had learned that a joint is only as strong as the preparation of its surfaces. From his mother, he had learned that the number on a page either tells the truth or it does not, and that the difference between those two things is always eventually visible. He had studied industrial engineering at a state university in Batangas City, worked his first 5 years in a small machine shop in Laguna doing calibration work, and joined Andrade Industrial Supply at 31 as a mid-level quality inspector. In 12 years, he had never been promoted to a title that reflected what he actually did. But the work itself had expanded steadily, more complex, more consequential, more quietly central to the company's ability to meet its contractual obligations. His father had a saying he returned to frequently, in the way that sayings become useful only after enough years have passed to understand them. Anak, ang gawa ay hindi nagsisinungaling. Kahit walang nanonood, ang resulta ay laging naroroon. The work does not lie. Even when no one is watching, the result is always there. Danilo had internalized this so completely that he sometimes had to remind himself that other people operated differently, that there were people in the same building who understood documentation as a formality rather than a record, who believed that a report filed and ignored was the same as a problem addressed. He had one daughter, Rina, who was 17 and studying for her university entrance examinations with the specific focused intensity of a person who has decided exactly what she wants and is not interested in discussing alternatives. She lived with her grandmother in Batangas from Monday to Thursday and came to his apartment in Cavite on weekends. He cooked on Saturdays, badly but earnestly, and they watched films in the evenings and did not require much conversation to occupy the time comfortably. Rina had called him on the afternoon of the celebration, having heard from a cousin who worked in Andrade's logistics team that there was a company party that evening. She asked if he was going. He told her he had not been invited. There was a silence. Then Rena said, in the precise and unsentimental way she had inherited from him, "Then you have your evening free. Use it." He had gone to the plant. The warning he filed at 11:47 p.m. concerned a variance in the dimensional tolerance of a batch of cold-formed fasteners scheduled for delivery to the automotive customer as part of the initial shipment under the new contract. The variance was within the range that automated quality systems were not calibrated to flag, a fact Danilo had documented 3 months earlier in a technical memo recommending an adjustment to the automated inspection parameters that had been received, acknowledged, and not acted upon. He had caught it through manual measurement, which was the way he caught most things, because he had learned over 12 years that automated systems were only as honest as the assumptions that had been built into them. He documented the batch, the measurement readings, the reference standard, and his recommended hold pending re-inspection. He noted in the report that the underlying cause was likely a temperature-related dimensional drift in the cold-forming press, a behavior he had flagged twice in the previous 6 months, both times in writing, both times without a formal response. He placed the report in the quality management system, sent a copy to his supervisor's email, and left for the airport at 5 in the morning. The Japanese manufacturing exchange program was 45 days. The institute had reached out to him directly after a technical paper he had submitted to an engineering journal the previous year, a paper published under his own name, which was the exception rather than the rule at Andrade, where most documentation bore departmental headers. They had found the paper because the methodology it described was being discussed in precision manufacturing circles as a practical solution to a problem that several facilities in the region had been handling inconsistently. Danilo had applied for leave through the proper channels. His direct supervisor, a man named Roberto Aguilar, who managed the quality department and who had built a comfortable career on the principle that difficult conversations were best avoided, had approved the leave within the hour, apparently under the impression that 45 days away from the plant would be straightforward to cover. The company's head of operations, a man named Leonard Sy, who had joined Andrade 18 months earlier from a logistics firm, and whose understanding of precision manufacturing was largely theoretical, had noted in the approval chain that the departure confirmed the quality team needed to reduce its dependence on individual expertise. Neither man had read the warning report Danilo filed on the night he left. For the first week and a half, nothing visibly went wrong. Andrade's quality department had 2 other engineers, Mila Santos, who handled supplier documentation, and a younger man named Jun Dizon, who had been with the company for 14 months and who was competent, careful, and not yet experienced enough to know which of the readings he was seeing were within normal variation and which were the beginning of something accumulating. Jun caught 2 alerts in the first week and resolved both from the documented procedures. He described this experience to Mila as going well. Mila, who had worked alongside Danilo for 8 years and who understood more than she was usually credited with, told him that going well was not the same as nothing being wrong, and that the difference was usually invisible until it was not. Leonard Sy told the managing director, a woman named Camille Andrade, that the quality department was performing normally, and that the concern about key person dependency had been validated. Camille, who was managing simultaneous negotiations with a second potential customer and preparing for an investor presentation, absorbed this assessment the way executives absorb assessments that confirm what they prefer to believe. On day 11, the automotive customer's quality team ran their incoming inspection on the first component's shipment. The reject rate was 9.3%. The contractual threshold was 1.5%. The customer's email arrived on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday, the legal and commercial teams at Andrade were reviewing the contract's penalty provisions. By Friday, Camille had called 3 meetings and learned with increasing clarity that the variance Danilo had flagged on the night he left had been documented, filed, and not acted upon, and that the cold-forming press issue he had mentioned twice in the 6 months prior had also been documented, filed, and not acted upon. Leonard told Camille that the quality engineer's departure had created a gap in operational coverage that the department had been unable to compensate for, and that the departure on short notice without adequate knowledge transfer had contributed to the current situation. Mila Santos, who was present for part of this meeting and who had a specific relationship with accurate statements, said to Leonard in the quiet and entirely direct way she said most things, he submitted an 11-page handover document. He filed a warning report the night he left. He sent the report to Roberto's email and logged it in the system. If the coverage gap existed, it existed because nobody read what he left behind. Leonard told her the matter was under internal review. Mila told Leonard that the matter was under internal review because the matter was a real problem, and that real problems did not become different problems by being reviewed internally. She then went back to her workstation and sent Danilo a message through the exchange program's contact system, which was the only way to reach him given that he had turned off his company phone before the flight left the gate. Danilo read the message during a break between sessions on a Thursday afternoon. He was in a calibration laboratory in Osaka, standing beside a measurement system of a precision that he had not previously had access to, having spent the morning learning that the dimensional drift behavior he had been managing manually at Andrade for years was a known phenomenon with a documented correction methodology that the Japanese facility had been applying successfully for 6 years. He called Rena that evening. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Did you document everything?" "Everything," he said. "Then you already know what you need to know," she said. He thought about that. Then he said, "The people on the floor didn't create this situation." "No," she said, "they didn't." "I'll send a message to Camille," he said, "not to come back, to make sure she has the correct information." He sent the message the following morning. It was 4 paragraphs. It described the warning report, the prior filings on the press drift issue, the location of the handover documentation, and the contact information for the Japanese Institute's technical team, who were willing to advise on remediation if Andrade chose to reach out formally. He noted that he was available to assist remotely on technical questions, but that he was not in a position to manage the production floor from another country, and that the people best positioned to implement a correction were Jun and Mila, if someone with sufficient authority gave them the mandate to act. He sent the message and went to the next session. Camille Andrade read the message 3 times. Each time she read it, she felt the same specific discomfort, not of being wrong exactly, but of understanding that being right about the contract and its value had not required her to understand where the value came from, and that this was a gap she had not previously examined because nobody had required her to examine it. She pulled the original warning report. She pulled the 2 prior memos on the press drift. She pulled the handover document, all 11 pages of it, and read it from the beginning. Then she called Roberto Aguilar and asked him why the warning report had not been acted upon. Roberto said the timing had been difficult given the contract celebration and the transition coverage question and the overall workload of the department. Camille asked whether the timing had been difficult or whether the report had not been read. Roberto was quiet for a moment. Camille suspended the fastener shipments pending reinspection. She contacted the automotive customer directly, before being required to with a full account of what had occurred, the variance, its documented origin, the decisions that had allowed it to reach the customer, and the remediation steps she was committing to. She accepted the contractual penalty for the defective batch. She told the customer that the correction would be independently verified before any further shipment. Leonard Sy told her this approach was unnecessary and that the situation could be managed through standard escalation channels without voluntary disclosure. Camille told Leonard that voluntary disclosure was the only version of this conversation that left the customer relationship intact, and that she was more interested in the relationship than in the management of its optics. She then sent Danilo a formal message asking whether he would be willing to advise the remediation team remotely for the remainder of his exchange program, and whether he would return at the end of the 45 days. She said she understood if the answer to the second question was no. Danilo read the message in the laboratory during a lunch break, beside a calibration rig that had taught him more in 4 weeks than the previous 3 years had. He replied that he would advise remotely. He said the answer to the second question depended on what the company intended to do differently, and that he was willing to discuss that when he returned. The remote advisory arrangement over the final 3 weeks was, in practice, Danilo walking Jun and Mila through the correction methodology from a laptop in Osaka, while a Japanese engineer looked over his shoulder and occasionally offered observations that improved the approach. The 3 of them, Danilo in Japan, Mila and Jun in Cavite, worked through the press calibration, the inspection parameter adjustment, and the full reinspection of the affected batch in systematic stages. Danilo documented every step in real time, not because anyone asked him to, but because his mother had taught him that the number on the page either tells the truth or it does not, and because his father had taught him that the work does not lie, and because 12 years of working in a company that had been using both of those things without acknowledging their source had not changed what was true about either of them. On the 43rd day of his exchange program, the automotive customers inspection team cleared the corrected batch. The contract was not terminated. The penalty cost Andrade $18 million in scrapped components and remediation expenses, significant, absorbable, and smaller than it would have been if Camille had chosen Leonard's approach. On the 45th day, Danilo flew home. Rena met him at the airport in Batangas, which was not the closest airport to where he lived but was where his mother was, and they had dinner at the family house, and his mother served the fish soup she made whenever someone came home after a long time. And Danilo ate 2 bowls and said very little and felt, without being able to precisely name it, that the 45 days had rearranged something in him that had needed rearranging. 3 days later, he met Camille Andrade in her office. She placed 3 documents on the desk between them. The first was a formal record correction, attaching his name to every technical submission produced over the past 7 years that bore the departmental header but had originated with him. The second was a restructuring proposal for the quality department, giving the quality engineering lead a title Danilo had never held, direct reporting access to the managing director and unilateral authority to hold production when specification thresholds were at risk. The third was an offer letter. The title was Head of Quality and Process Engineering. The salary was a number he did not expect. The reporting structure was what the second document described. He read all 3 carefully, which took 20 minutes. Camille did not rush him. When he finished, he set them down and said, "Roberto." She said Roberto had resigned during the 3rd week of Danilo's absence, after it became clear that the pattern of unfiled and unforwarded reports was not limited to the fastener incident. He asked about Leonard. She said Leonard had been moved to a different role, one that did not include oversight of production operations. He said, Jun and Mila. She said Jun had been named acting quality lead during the remediation period and had performed at a level that suggested the title should be made permanent. Mila had been asked to lead the supplier documentation reform that the remediation had identified as a secondary need. He looked at the offer letter. He thought about his father's saying, "The work does not lie. Even when no one is watching, the result is always there." He thought about the 12 years of results that had been there without his name attached to them. And he thought about the 45 days in Osaka, where his name had been on the paper and people in 4 countries had read it and found it useful. "One condition," he said. Camille said, "Tell me, every report, every protocol, every standard that comes from this department has the name of the person who wrote it. Not the department. Not the team header. The person." Camille said already in the restructuring proposal. Page 3. He picked up the pen. 6 months later, Andrade Industrial Supply held a gathering at the plant in Cavite. Not a rooftop ballroom, not a catered gala. Long tables in the production common area, food voted on by the employees, an invitation list that started with the assembly team and ended with the board. Every name was on the list, including the cleaning crew and the 2 technicians who had joined 6 weeks earlier and still sometimes asked where the restroom was. Danilo's name was first, not because it was alphabetically first, because Rena had asked Mila to put it there, and Mila had, and no one had struck through it with any color of pen. Camille spoke briefly. She said the company had learned something in the past 6 months that she wished it had learned earlier, which was that the people who keep a production line running and the people who receive recognition for a production line running were not always the same people, and that the gap between those 2 groups was where most institutional failures begin. She said the company intended to close that gap. She did not call Danilo indispensable. He had asked her not to. He had explained that indispensable was another way of saying the system still depended on one person, and that the goal was a system that would not need to. After the gathering, Camille handed him an envelope. Inside was an invitation to present at a regional precision manufacturing conference in Tokyo. Co-presenter listed as Jun Dizon, Jun's name appearing first. He read the invitation and handed it to Jun, who had come to stand beside him. Jun read it and looked at Danilo and said, "You don't have to put me first." Danilo said, "You did the work. The paper doesn't lie." They walked out of the factory together into the evening. The production floor behind them was running, quietly, stably, the machines doing what machines do when the people responsible for them are allowed to do their work properly. Danilo stood for a moment and looked at the building. 12 years of evenings in it. 12 years of the lights being on because someone knew where the problem was. 12 years of reports filed under names that were not his. He felt none of the things he might have expected to feel. What he felt was simpler. The clean, specific satisfaction of a person who had finally stopped giving the building more than he gave himself, and who had come back not to hold it up alone, but to help build something that would hold itself up. He got in his car and drove home to Cavite, where Rena was visiting for the weekend, and when he arrived she was at the kitchen table with her entrance examination preparation materials spread across every available surface, and did not look up when he came in. He made coffee. He sat across from her. After a while she said, without looking up, "How was it?" "Good," he said. "Did they put your name on the list?" He thought about it. "They put it first," he said. She looked up. She studied him for a moment with the same precise evaluating attention she brought to everything. "Good," she said, and went back to work. Before I end this story, I'd like to leave you with this. Danilo Reyes spent 12 years keeping something from falling apart, and the company he worked for spent 12 years not knowing his name when nothing was broken. It took a crisis to make the invisible visible. That is a failure of the institution, not of the man. The man had been visible all along. In every report filed, every variance caught, every warning documented and dated and time-stamped at 11:47 at night on the floor of a company that was celebrating without him. The work does not lie. Even when no one is watching, the result is always there. You may be working in a place that has not yet learned to read the results. That is not a statement about your worth. It is a statement about their reading. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, what it takes for them to learn is for you to stop standing alone in the dark keeping things alive, and to go to Osaka, and to let the truth be where it lands. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it today. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and we will see you in our next story.